Hello. Today we start a new series on justice. Now I know that justice is a very abstract and broad-ranging concept, and it is going to be, in a sense, difficult to treat of justice in a way that can do it justice, that will be satisfactory to the majority of our listeners. But we'll give it a go, and we know that the implementation of justice, or the effects of justice, or the effects of injustice, the absence of justice, are felt by all of us. We look around the world and we're concerned. We see an injustice in the death of innocent civilians in war zones. We see people left on the margins of their societies, in developed countries as well, sleeping rough, living rough, discarded seemingly by their societies. We think, well, there's injustice there. We look at the limited opportunities for the younger generation and future generations. The housing crisis in Australia, for example, where young people will not be able to afford a home because of what's happened in the market, and we see that as an instance of injustice. Then we can look at, everybody would know examples from their own experience of people quarrelling over estates, over wills, and whether inheritance has been divided fairly. And this is something that affects common, humble families as well as the elite. The Murdoch family, who run News Corp, the great media dynasty, is currently embroiled in a battle at the core of which is the issue of justice in terms of the power that can be exercised by the siblings over that media empire. Rupert, the patriarch, has favoured one son, but there are 3 other children that were meant to have equal voting rights, equal say, from a trust agreement that was laid years ago, who have now been sidelined, and so they're taking it to court. And at the core of this spat is the issue of justice and rights. We can feel that there is injustice sometimes in the way that we are spoken to, in the way that we are treated, in the tone that has been adopted. People also wonder about justice generally. One of the big arguments that atheists rely upon is what's called the problem of evil in philosophy. They say that if there is a God with the qualities that theists attribute to God, like justice, goodness, and omnipotence, then how could such a God allow all the evil in the world? I know somebody whose baby was born with a congenital defect, a missing heart valve or cerebral palsy or something. Why did it happen to them? It seems so unfair.
Why did it happen to an innocent baby?
Why did it happen to an innocent baby? We can go generic or general with this. This raises the question of justice on a global, maybe a cosmic scale. It leads a lot of people to despair and become faithless, because if God is all powerful and he wants the good, then why can't why doesn't he simply intervene and correct these evils? And these evils are not only social evils, man-made evils, but they are also natural evils. Natural events like earthquakes and tsunamis, and tornadoes. Is it just that some people are holidaying on a Thai beach and a tsunami comes and sweeps them away and destroys their family, or just destroys a portion of their family, and the other people have to live on without their loved ones? This raises questions of justice for a lot of people. What else might raise questions of justice, Belinda? Is there anything?
So I keep on thinking of a reel that I saw today about a girl who was 8.5 months pregnant.
Yes.
Wanting an abortion.
Okay.
And
so you're looking at justice for the
child,
for the growing life, for the
I mean, at
for the embryo
months,
in the womb.
You have a fully formed child.
Yes.
And should be basically murdering a baby.
Right. So
there's no justice there.
This raises the question of looking at justice not just for fully developed human beings, but for babies in the womb.
Well, at 8.5 months, they're almost fully developed. She could wait another half month, have the child and put it out for adoption. There's no excuse for that. None whatsoever.
Yeah, it outrages a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, we have to look at, therefore, all types of humanity, from cradle to grave, from womb to tomb. But as well, that opens the vista to asking, is there justice that applies between human beings and animals? Is it right to ask or to complain about injustice towards animals? Does the concept apply?
Absolutely.
And what about justice towards the earth? Yeah. So the field of justice has to take into consideration everyday situations. It has to take into consideration a range of beings, from the natural world right up to the cosmic being. It's not merely confined to our social institutions. It happens outside institutional frameworks. Justice and injustice happen outside institutional frameworks. Although on that point, the philosopher John Rawls said that justice is the preeminent virtue of all our social institutions, which is giving a very important place to justice. Every one of our social institutions should be founded on justice. It is the most important virtue or quality they can possess. Justice has been seen by philosophers as the epitome of virtue. In certain philosophies, certainly it was considered one of the 4 cardinal virtues from antiquity: justice, temperance, fortitude or courage, and what was the last one? Justice, temperance, prudence was the last one. In a way, they are all forms of rationality. And so if we are, as Aristotle says, the rational animal, then to be rational should involve being just in our dealings with other people. So we need to form a concept of justice. We need to keep a tight grip on justice and practice justice in all our dealings. One simple approach to justice, one simple definition, I suppose, is justice is giving people what they deserve. It's rendering just deserts. Now, the deserts there are not, it's not some just desserts is not some fancy name for an internet business that makes sweets and pastries and exclusively sweets and pastries and markets them. No, we're in a dessert here. We're referring to what is owed to a person, what they deserve, presumably from past actions, from what they've done. I want you to think about how relevant a definition like that may be to you. There have been many schools of justice, many approaches to the subject, and many types of justice as well. And it's very difficult for philosophers to frame a theory that covers the whole gamut of things that justice seems to apply to. In terms of different strains of justice, philosophers talk about retributive justice, which is essentially justice as punishment. And some people like to defend that view of justice, that wrongdoers need to be punished, and that's what justice does, and that's good in itself. But there are other approaches to justice, like justice as a corrective, as something that reforms somebody, as rehabilitative, as something that rehabilitates people, and justice as restorative. What does that mean? Well, whenever something's gone wrong, there have been victims and people offended, and the practical question is, what can you do for those victims to improve their lot, to help them, to restore them, perhaps not back to where they were, but to a better place? It may involve some sort of compensation. It may involve some sort of acknowledgement by the perpetrator. And in a lot of indigenous systems of justice, they bring the offender and the victim face to face. And it's important for them, maybe a facilitator, not so much a judge, but when it gets into our court system, it could be a magistrate, but originally just a facilitator who tries to help that perpetrator take responsibility for what they've done and to hear what it's like on the receiving end. And that whole process seems to be, in such systems, real essential for justice. We think of the Truth and Reconciliation Councils. One was set up in post-apartheid South Africa to hear the stories. Like, you were doing this, you were following this policy, but this was the effect on me and my family and so on.
And then you've got a natural form of justice in karma.
Natural justice, yes.
Yeah. I just called it karma, but...
Yes, now, There's natural justice, there's distributive justice, which
I
is...
see more of that going on
Okay, well,
than anything
let's
else.
take up on what you were saying. By the way, I did mention distributive justice as well, didn't I? That's more to do with how the goods of society are distributed amongst people. And I'm not just talking about material goods, I'm also talking about liberties and privileges and power and things like that. So the theorists of distributive justice, like Rawls, they are particularly interested in how those goods are distributed amongst people. Because if the distribution is a poor one, there is injustice at the heart of the system. Now, Belinda mentioned natural justice, and that gives rise to a few thoughts. Let's start with the more down-to-earth one, and that is the school of natural law and natural justice, which people associate with certain philosophers, maybe John Locke and so on, that say that the natural law is accessible to human reason and we should be able to practice it without appeal to a higher authority, and a lot of it has to do with the securing of rights, and particularly property rights. What makes mine, mine? And how should it be protected against others, and indeed against the institution of the government? So there's a whole natural law school. But I think, Belinda, when you brought it up, you're looking at it as a cosmic principle. And indeed, justice is a supreme cosmic principle, and most cultures have had some kind of concept of it, have made some kind of tribute to it. For example, in India, it's been called karma. In ancient Egypt, it was Maat. And justice has been personified in the Greco-Roman tradition, which comes down to us in the West, and we see statuary giving this tribute to justice, statuary on law courts and public buildings, Lady Justice who's blindfolded and with the sword in one hand and with the scales in another hand, right? So justice is meant to be blind. What does that mean? It means impartial.
Impartial, yeah.
Right? It shouldn't favour the rich over the poor or the powerful over the weak.
No.
Justice should be applied evenly. And the scales are there to weigh the evidence on each side of a matter. They are the scales of deliberation. And the sword is the sword of judgment, because at the end of any process of deliberation, one has to reach a judgment. And hopefully that judgment will be based on just principles, and the judgment may issue in sentencing in our institutions through our court system, and then the sentencing may involve different scales of punishment. There's capital punishment. Some people question the justice of capital punishment per se. And then there are prison sentences, which may be geared to protecting society, or part of the rationale for it may be to do with rehabilitating the criminal. And then there's community service as well, which has to do with making some sort of compensation. And there's an element of rehabilitation in there as well, the element of restoration. So every culture has its concept of justice. Now, justice as a cosmic principle. Well, in the Judeo-Christian Islamic monotheistic tradition, justice is meant to derive ultimately from the Creator, from God. And here again you have another school of justice, I suppose, another approach to understanding the source of justice, that justice is doing what God sets down, what God's commandments are, what God's laws are. Now, it certainly helps if we have a picture of the character of God that embodies justice as well as mercy. And sometimes people fail to see how God has been just and how God is just. So one way is to say that not only does our freedom come from a divine being, but our sense of justice comes from a divine being, and our grasp on objective morality comes from a divine being. Plato interestingly asked the question through a Socratic dialogue, is what's right or good because the gods decree it so, or do the gods decree it because it's good? So is justice and goodness, but let's just look at justice, is justice a principle that the gods or even God can't not abide? Or is it some capricious, whimsical thing that a deity or deities can simply command? Now,
It's a necessity, that's all I know.
right. So when you think of a cosmic principle or natural justice operating, it's going to operate willy-nilly, whether we want it to or not. That's the sense I believe you mean it in, don't you? Like it's happening all the time, everywhere, and nobody escapes its net.
No, you don't.
Or its necessity.
You don't. It comes one way or another.
Right, and people have different colloquialisms for that. Oh, it's karma, what goes around comes around. Karma's a bitch.
Karma's slow though. Can be very slow.
Yes. And then there is that saying that justice delayed is justice denied. And a lot of people think that the afterlife is necessary. So it's tied up with religion as well. The afterlife is necessary because what about all of the glaring injustices that are left unresolved on earth? There has to be a place where there is judgment and a reckoning.
Well, they say no justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace, because we've said that before on this podcast, haven't we?
And when you die, they say rest in peace. So,
rest in
peace. If you feel that you've had a life full of injustices.
Well, to rest in peace, you need to rest in justice.
Yeah, you have to.
I think
very important.
Most of us would probably believe that justice kicks in at some point. And
I believe in it.
I think the majority of human beings on the planet are religious to some degree or other. Yeah. They believe in God, giving God different names. But whether you think that justice will come in a day of judgment and in a reckoning for one's sins, or justice is somehow the result of reincarnation and karma, most people believe that these wrongs, these injustices, these imbalances in the cosmic order do get corrected at some point. They must be corrected. There's something about their non-correction which seems to be intolerable to the human mind. And in fact, the Egyptian goddess Maat is about a cosmic harmony and balance.
That's right.
It's built into the concept so that injustice puts things out of balance and justice brings things back into balance.
It's very healing.
Exactly, Belinda. You took
Most
the words out of
healing
my
thing.
mouth, because I mean, we've been talking about holistic healing up to this point.
That's right. It's
And
a big part of it.
part of the healing is balance, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And part of
Justice.
peacemaking is balance. And so with justice, again, we're looking at balance, a balance to the cosmic order. So for the rest of this transmission, I just want to dwell on that, which is perhaps the most, very abstract. Let's take us into the stratosphere a bit, but important for us to understand. So let's backpedal a bit and ask ourselves, what are we as human beings and what human life consists of? And I'm not going to bring contested beliefs into the picture here. I'm just, what can you observe? Well, you should be able to observe that life is thought and action, and a lot of traditions have to do with bringing a harmony or balance between thought and action. Life is also action and reaction, and there needs to be a balance or a harmony brought between the two. So before even we look at action and reaction, we have to look at thought and action. There may be the sense that in the Edenic state, thought and action move together. The Chinese have that concept in Taoism of the Tao, and we're meant to be in the flow of the Tao. And flowing with the Tao, we see our rightful place, we take up on our rightful opportunities, we're in tune with life, we're in tune with the flow of life, which you might even regard as a providence. It expresses a deeper meaning or logos. And thought and action would be working together. Now, thought and action can be separated. And part of this spiritual program is to try to bring thought and action together in a healing way, restorative, integrated way. If you look at yourself, when your attention is in your body and you're aware of your surroundings, you're grounded. Your attention is mediated by your body and directed into your immediate surroundings. But it's not always like that. Sometimes your attention is withdrawn. Now, you can look at this on a momentary basis. So if your attention is withdrawn and somebody's talking to you and you don't even realize it, or you trip over something in the street because your awareness isn't there, it's somewhere else. So there is something counter to groundedness. If you go to the original meaning of the Greek word ecstasy, it means standing outside oneself. Right? So we can also, we're so constituted that we can also stand outside ourselves in a way, outside of our body-mediated experience. And some people seem to be very life be in it, participating in life, and all there is the participation. There's no time for reflection because everything's coming thick and fast and they're engaged with life. And other people seem to be withdrawn from life, looking at life like a moving parade. They're witnesses to life. But nobody can ever get off that merry-go-round of life, because even when you're a witness, you're still part of life and things are happening to you and you're making choices by default, even by not making choices. And conversely, the person who seems to be so engrossed in life that they don't ever question it or step outside of it or reflect upon it are nevertheless, in all of their actions, acting on principles, implicit principles, with implicit values. So that where does it come from? It comes somewhere from within. Has it been examined and considered? Maybe, maybe not. What I'm trying to get at is, no matter whether you're more extroverted or introverted, to use psychological terms, everyone is involved in both thought and action, living and also being a witness to life. You could say practice and theory. There's theory and practice that are going on. And then there is our behaviour that's out there as an objective fruit of our tree of living. We see it, others can see it in the world. But there's always this relationship between theory and practice. And the philosophical approach that puts theory before practice is called idealism. And the philosophical approach that puts practice before theory is pragmatism. Now, the important thing is that both approaches are necessary to understand, and both of them talk about theory and practice. For pragmatism, theory is more instrumental. We go about doing, and as we go along, we develop a theory that seems to work, that seems to model the world and enables us to act upon the world, because it's acting upon the world that seems to be the most important thing. But in idealism, we try to understand what everything's about before we put it into practice. But whether you're principally idealist in your approach or principally pragmatic in your approach, both of these schools, or both of these approaches, acknowledge the importance of both thought and action, both theory and practice, and the need to harmonise them.
But people go through different stages. Like
Yeah.
people go through an extroverted stage, maybe an introverted stage, then an extroverted stage.
Yeah.
Ebb and flow, ebb and flow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
I found that apparent in my life. Yeah.
it can ebb and flow, and sometimes you can find yourself, not knowing, am I introverted or extroverted?
I'm both.
Yeah. I think
I wouldn't say I'm an
ultimately
introvert.
we are
I wouldn't
both.
say I'm an extrovert. I would say I'm both.
Yeah.
I could be whatever I want.
Mm-hmm. The ancient Roman god Janus was the god of doorways. Sometimes the little statues were placed over doorways because it's a two-headed god. There was a face turned one way and a face turned the other way. And
Theatrical.
Janus faced, looking two ways, and our consciousness is a bit like that. Our awareness is like that. One part looking at existence, one part looking at consciousness, one part orientated to the exterior world and one part to the interior world, and somehow trying to bring about a balance. Is there a way of living? I hope there is. I hope our spiritual program is tending towards this.
Me too.
Is there a way of living such that one can spontaneously engage in life without any sacrifice that we normally associate with proper examination of life and self-reflection? And is there a way of gaining that philosophical view of life without missing the opportunities of living? Is there a way for thought and action to flow together? And so when we come back, we can talk about action and reaction. because now we've placed action in the overall scheme.